unfavorable variance somewhat, being in the green. And the last line is referring to the forecasted values, and the way that is projected, it's for the month of June, being the last month of the year. It's projected based on the actuals for the year and the same period in the preceding year. And you can see that we are tracking unfavorably on the revenue front and favorably in the expenditure. So if we go to the next page, we have changed the look of the key metrics slightly to make them easier to read. You can see the key metrics that drive the variances in a bar graph format. So we can see at a glance that overall we are tracking, we have achieved a surplus in May of 3.8 million. And we can see the key drivers for that. On your left-hand side, the metrics are talking about the revenue items, and your, on your left-hand side is the revenue, and on your right-hand side is the expenditure. And that is compared to the budgeted numbers. We will talk about the key metrics and the key drivers and the variances next, once we have looked at the dashboard at a glance. And we will delve into more detail as we talk about the report itself. So the next page is a similar look and feel, and that is talking about the year-to-date as at May 31. And as you can see, it's a more favourable picture. We are tracking a lot closer to budget on both the revenue and the expenditure side of things. So this is indicative of May not just being a momentary change in some of these metrics. It's not indicative of the year-to-date performance. So we can now move to the report itself and talk about those key drivers. If we look at first things first, the revenue side of things, we can see that the year-to-date revenue, which excludes the vested assets, was 158.2 million. And the year-to-date revenue was below the target by 5.4 million, as we've already discussed. And there are a few drivers to that. Firstly, MOT transport choices of 206K had been received year-to-date, which is tracking behind budget by 1.2 million. NZTA OPEX subsidies of 5.5 has been received year-to-date, being behind budget by 5.7 million. However, these unfavorable variances total 11.2 million, taking into account a number of subsidies and grants being favorable to budget, such as NZTA emergency works and CapEx subsidies collectively being 3.8 favorable to budget, brings the unfavorable variance to 7.2 against the budget. When we look at building consent fees and charges, they are tracking behind budget by 1.4 million, and levies are behind by 1.1. These are offset by other fees and charges being favorable to budget, coming to the net variance to budget of 1.8 million below budget. When we look at the expenditure side of things, we can see that the key drivers are the same as in the preceding month. We have one of the main ones being the personnel costs. They are tracking at 2.8 million above budget due to under budgeting of staff costs, and we had covered that in the previous meeting, and that's unchanged. Overhead expenditure is 8.3 year to date, which is 1.1 above budget, and that is primarily due to the higher insurance costs and rates expenses than those originally budgeted. We also have the finance costs that are below budget, so that's a favorable variance, meaning that the finance costs and the cost of borrowing capital has not been as high as we had budgeted. Operating projects are 13.9 million year to date, which is 2.3 million below budget, and that is primarily due to delays in operating projects, for example, organizational strategy and computer system development. The next paper will be covering the projects in more detail, so I will not dwell on this unless there are any questions. Is there anything that anybody wanted to ask before I jump onto the forecast and the balance sheet at this stage?
Covering the whole of all of just those pages.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. The questions will be in relation to tab 7, 7.1, 7.2, 7.3.
I'm sort of concerned about, you've talked about staff costs particularly, but in the month of May, we had a variation of over 1 month of $1 million. But if you look even on page 32, it's about 800,000 overspend versus budget. And if you extrapolate that forward, it's sort of 9.6 million of staff overspend. And it's nicely termed as under budgeting of staff. It could be termed as too many staff, couldn't it? And I challenged that. I've challenged it repeatedly, but it does seem this is going to get away on us. Maybe the CEO wants to respond, but it is very, very challenging in a certain expense line. We're getting so far out of budget.
Thank you for your question. I just wanted to say that part of that figure would be the holiday pay remediation accrual, and that work is still ongoing. So as previously discussed, this accrual will land in the 2023-24 financial year, and that is impacting that number.
The other question I raised, there's two things, is our consulting and legal budget for 1 month is 500,000 over budget. That is significant. That's a lot of legal and consulting advice that we weren't budgeting on. Is there a problem that we should be aware of?
We need to take into account the fact that the month of May was the month of the peak of work for LTP. So we were at that peak point delivering the LTP. So there were additional consultants involved to help us prepare and help us get over the line. So that would be one of the reasons for that consultant cost being high.
Because of concern is that, and this is a pet hate of mine, you've got other expenditure 1.63. Other expenditure should never be 1.63 million because it's other expenditure is a place where you hide stuff. Is there something in there that we should be aware of?
I can look into the detail of that.
There's a lot of money, isn't it, to have another expenditure, not in a ledger code.
I will find out for you.
Thank you.
Councillor Munt.
Excuse me. Page 30, I just wanted to get a bit of clarity around the community services and facilities. Percentage of community centres / halls that generate revenue or equal to 20% of operating costs. Year to date, 0%. The year to date target is 75%. Just wondering if you could speak to that. It's in the green, so I presume green means that it's on target, but the year to date says 0. So just wondering what that's supposed to look like and how we're planning to achieve that, if you do know, and just some clarity around what that actually means.
Thank you. I do not have that detail to hand just now, but I will revert to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Munt. Councillor Glidden.
I mean, sort of reiterating what Grant's talked about, and we've seen an increase in budget from last year's personal costs of $6 million, and then we have the holiday pay remediation on top of that, and so it just looks like a significant blowout, and we're not even finished the year. So I've got some concerns around what that looks like. And again, my question is in the overview dashboard, when we're looking at the red and the green, what determines red and green? So the colour coding system.
Yep, thank you. So red and green basically tells us whether we are favourable or unfavourable to budget. So if it is in the green, that it means that the variance is in our favour. If it is in the red, then it is unfavourable. For example, if you look at the expenditure side where it is green, it means that we have spent less than we had budgeted, and that's why it's green. And likewise, on the revenue side, if we had made more in revenue than we had planned or budgeted, then it's in the green, and vice versa. So it's just a colour coding for ease of reading.
Okay, so $1 variance would determine red or green? Is there a dollar amount that determines that at all?
It is rounded to millions.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dean?
I guess I was just picking up on both of those points there, and back on page 30 again. Councillor Munt's question around the 0% for a line there, but it's still showing as green. I don't quite understand how that's can be green when 0% clearly it must be below budget. Is that just an error, or was it a?
Yeah, comment taken. I will find out what's driving this. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Councillor Miller?
Just referring to page 29 of the full balance sheet, I'd like to understand the two, particularly investment numbers there. You've got a budget of 140 million for investments in CCOs, and the actuals is 195 million, which is a 55 million increase. That's great. But our investment property decreases by 17 million in the same period. Is that revals, or what? The numbers don't look right to me. Can you explain why those numbers are like?
Yeah, part of that will be the revaluations. I will, however, find out the full extent of the detail, and I will get back to you.
It seems strange that our investment property would decrease by 17 million when it's appreciating property assets.
Yep, that's a fair comment. I will get some detail, and I'll get back to you.
Sorry. Thank you, Grant. Any further questions, councillors? Thank you for Angie's. I appreciated reading through the report. It's good to see a commitment to the DC development contributions graphic. Page 24 speaks to, on the year-to-date revenue, speaks to vested assets. Immediately I thought, was it included, had it been included in the past? And reading through that particular report also points to a more accurate determination of finances and performance. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. It's just to give the readers a more relevant information.
Page 25, it's also good to see the point being made around the holiday accruals, but also a question around that, I guess, back to the CEO, is managing holiday accruals, and are we being effective in that space?
Yep. Thank you, Shane. Yes, very much so. There's a programme of work. I think we covered that in a previous meeting around we're addressing currently employed staff, and then we will go out to staff. So we have to go back 10 years, and we'll use a variety of different mechanisms to do best endeavours to contact staff from the 10 years, and we'll use social media if we know where they are in terms of addresses. And for Angie's, I think we have to, we've got a 15-year time period where we have to hold the funds.
Thank you.
That's correct.
Thank you, Sharon. Page 27, it's good to see that debt level is unchanged, but also a question around headroom to debt limit. What is that?
Sure. So the debt at the headroom to limit is 79 million as at the end of May.
Thank you. A couple of the other questions I had there have been asked. I guess my initial thoughts around reading the first report was, has the current rephasing of projects been put into it? But then reading the next report, it's quite clear that what we're seeing is what is current and the transition to the future. So thank you for this report. Councillors, if there are no more questions on this particular tab, do I have a mover and seconder? Moved, Councillor Dean, seconded, Deputy Mayor Lyle. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against, being none, so moved. Sorry, my navigation. We move on to the next report, which is the tab 8, organisational projects for the period of 31. Jen.
Morena.
Morena.
Morena. Okay, so I'll take you through the report as a high-level overview. So the report is to the end of May. One of the things I had to do, joining up for the LTP discussions as well, Shane, is we are working still with last year's budget. So the rephasing that we talked about during the LTP process will be applied to the next financial year. So that isn't effective as of now in our reporting. So as of end of May, we are currently at 48% of budget. In March, when I last reported to you, we were at 46%, so we are heading in the right direction. I think you'll see from the worm, we have like a sort of parting of the lines, and then we're starting to get a little bit closer together. Potentially not where we want to be, but it is an improvement on where we have been. For the month itself, we forecast, our forecast spend was 12.5 million, and we managed to improve on that and produce 13.5 million. The draft end of year figures are currently being worked through. Early indications that we have definitely improved on our spend productivity, but we're going to do some analysis on that and look forward to bringing you those numbers at the next finance and performance meeting, where we can summarise that all up. That will also include our carry forwards, what that looks like, and also how those carry forwards will be apportioned over next year and future years as appropriate to the project timelines. Just moving down to the next part is our Better Off funding, the local water done well. So our Better Off funding is now transitioned into the local water done well. We have the remaining funds, as you may already be aware, the remaining funds or unspent money from our projects under the Better Off funding will go into that local water done well, and we'll be focusing those on water projects, which is part of the requirement, and the Lincoln Town Centre will benefit from that. Okay, moving into the major projects. So we do have a couple of projects that are at practical completion, so that's great to see some progress in that space. The projects sort of definitely highlighted in red. We're all aware of Waihora Whātaro, which has now been approved through the RTP process, so that will reignite in the next financial year. I have put Prebbleton Reservoir as a moderate, though the spend is looking fine. We are out on timeline. We'll do a little bit of a deeper dive into that. We have been behind on that for a while, and that's because of some long lead items that have needed to be purchased from overseas, and I believe that there's also some work going on with the roundabouts that is working in with. So I think as we go into the next financial year, we'll look at whether we need to reset that timeline. Okay, moving on to risks and issues. They do remain largely unchanged from our last report. In saying that, we're not just leaving them. There is a lot of work being done in our strengthening capability, and our assurance work is looking at this. So what we see here, we're not just sitting on, we're addressing through areas of our work program and improvement initiatives. In terms of assurance, we're now conducting what I'm calling mid-flight or in-play major project reviews. We are currently doing one now, which is on the Ellesmere to Pines pipeline. So we look forward to bringing that back to you at a future Finance Performance Committee meeting. Look, we're approaching these with two lenses. We're approaching it with a growth mindset, so taking on learnings early, using the experience around us to put into those projects and help them along their way. But we're also taking a risk perspective as well. So this is around mitigating risk early in the process if we do have any that we're exposed to. And through that process, we'll also affirm the things that we're doing really well as an organisation and need to continue to do. In terms of strengthening our capability and performance, though it's not necessarily always evident in these reports, there's a huge amount of work by multiple teams in the background to strengthen our ability to mobilise and deliver. And we do anticipate that you'll start to see these evidence in our performance in future reports. But there is a bit of groundwork that needs to go on in the meantime. There is a few things that we've made really good progress on, and that's in terms of our reporting and getting better transparency and better time reporting through some dashboards that have been created. So we're in the process of implementing those at the moment. There's also been a huge amount of work in our project, in the development of our project delivery processes, which is looking really strong, and the teams are going to be workshopping through those pretty soon, and it helps us all align and deliver in a more of a standardised model in a way that we can evaluate how we're doing and make improvements along the way. In terms of a general wrap-up, look, we will continue to develop the content of this report, and as we stand up our systems and processes and as they embed, we'll be able to produce sort of slightly different metrics to give you a clearer perspective of our performance. We've tended largely over the years to focus on finance as a measure of performance, but as you'll be aware, there are other elements that we need to bring into that to really show how we are progressing. And that's more around being, planned and completed. So we're bringing in that timeline element as well. And that's all I had. Thank you. If you have any questions.
Kia ora, Jen. Thank you very much for the report. Councillors, are there questions, please? Or comments? Councillor Miller?
Hi, Jen. It's a understanding type question. I'm keen to understand our 5 orders expenditure, how we're managing that in the light of sort of the reforms that are coming. Is that totally debt funded? Are we aiming to hand that over to a third party as a debt funded business, or are we required to recognise the DC component? Let's just use for argument's sake that 20% of the project is DC funded. We are only able to accrue 80% of that cost to the debt component to be potentially handed forward. I'd just like to understand how we're managing that, or strategically managing that.
I think that's a me question. At the moment, we're expecting some correspondence out in the next couple of weeks from the Minister with regards to the financial components for the local water done well. At this moment in time, we don't have clarity, and once we've received that correspondence, we will start to work through and understand, and we will feed that back into the modelling workshop, the follow-up one that we said we'd have with councillors in terms of what the options are for Selwyn going forward.
So in a actual BAU type case, and we're receiving cash into our business here, are we allocating the cash to these projects or fully debt funding them? Where is the cash?
That's probably a question I'd have to ask for Angie's to come back and provide clarification. I can't give you that direct answer.
So just for clarity, Angie's, how are we going to get these feedback to these questions? Will you just do an all email that will just clarify for us, or will we wait to the next F&P meeting, or when will this happen?
We can do both. We'll send you circulate an email out of session and make sure that it's recognised in the next report.
The reason I ask is probably clear, is that, for us as a business, if we're able to hand off a significant portion of debt rather than spending cash, it helps our balance sheet when we change up.
Thank you, Grant. Councillor Hassan?
Thank you. Look, on a follow-up question from that, and sorry to sound repetitive, but how are we making progress with regards to the breakdown of development contributions on a area basis? We have 4 areas that we collect, and I'm just wondering how much progress we're making, so people understand how much, the ratepayers understand how much has been collected towards community, how much for water, how much for roading, how much for reserves within each of the catchment areas, 4 catchment areas.
Thank you. I will take this question. On page 25, we have included the breakdown of development contributions split by community, roading and food paths, support services and water services. If there is any other way you would like this presented, please provide your feedback, and we will include it in the next report.
And I think for Angie's that you've got it by ward as well, and you could circulate that again to all councillors.
Yeah, we're able to provide that. Yeah.
It's the catchment area that I'm looking for, not the overall. It's how it's broken up into the various catchments.
And would you like that detail included in the following reports?
Please.
Sure.
Noted. Councillor Dean?
Thanks, Jen. I asking you to crystal ball something for me. The issue you raised as an issue, the misalignment between the budgeted and the project delivery and the large-scale projects and all the things you've raised in your issues and risks. As you look forward, can you see, is there any way that you can see that we can quantify how these might play out, and how we can look at contingencies above and beyond the contingencies that we're already making now? What I'm trying to avoid is the likes of the Whātaro, which is obviously going from 9.9 to 19 in the future. So what planning is going into that?
So, so that is definitely an area that we're looking into, and part of that planning actually starts with the LTP processes. So we actually, it's not just what we're doing in terms of delivery now, it's actually how we're going through and really starting from our LTP planning processes and feeding that in. There are some extraneous factors with Waihora Whātaro, which you know, some of them could have been maybe perceived when we did the original budgets for that. Some of them possibly not, especially after, you know, that was a post-COVID type of situation as well, with a lot of escalations. But what we are trying to do is make sure we get our budgeting processes done well up front, and making sure we're resourcing that appropriately during the LTP. And actually, we do have a lot of strength in those areas as well. So it's just really learning from the things that we do well and strengthening the things that we just may need to improve on, and how we factor in that risk.
Yeah. And I appreciate that we have some great strengths in those areas. And it's we've just asked our ratepayers, we've given them a 15% increase. If we now need to be tracking that really, really carefully to make sure that we're not going to be repeating that in the future. So we need, it's our responsibility to crystal ball as much as we can. And I appreciate it as crystal ball.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Dean. Sharon?
Thank you, Shane. Yep, and I think that as you can see, what we've been doing with the financial reports in terms of dashboards and reporting, there's a part of our quality improvement work which includes our digital capability is aligning the capital works and the financial programs, and they're the first two cabs off the rank in terms of priority from the funding that came through in the long-term plan. So Matt's working really closely with Tim Mason and Alison and Jenny to make sure that we get systems that allow and enable, still in the early phase, but that will come to fruition. And Tim, I don't know if there's anything you want to add in particular that's of...
Yeah, but the whole crystal ball thing is interesting.
You might need it's still not working, please.
There we go. The crystal ball concept is interesting and not one I'm entirely comfortable with. We should be able to come to you with a really good visibility forecast and reporting on regard to how we're going and where we're going. But Sharon's quite correct. A lot of that relies on accuracy and information, and a lot of the work we're doing at the moment is to ensure that. So, you know, over the next couple of months, I would expect that the reporting that you're seeing is accurate, and we'll be able to give you some really good forecasts. So less of the crystal ball gazing and more accurate forecasting off the back of improvement in regard to our systems and processes.
Thank you, Tim. Councillor Munt.
Page 25, just having a look at the DCs and the breakdown again. Obviously, we've got quite a few things that are in the red there. Given that we know that consents have been tracking downwards at times, is there some adjustment that's going on towards our budgets and what we're anticipating in terms of potential DCs coming right back due to less consents? Where are we at the moment, and what are we anticipating in terms of collecting DCs in the next year or two?
Sorry, Jenny, that's gone back to the financial report.
Councillor Munt, I think we have moved through that report. That's a very valid question. Is there any response, or would you like to follow that up?
Yeah, we will follow that up. Yep.
Thank you, Councillor Munt. Councillor Miller.
Seeking some guidance, I suppose. You've got in the major projects Pines 120, in light of the government's announcement around easing restrictions on growth, the potential for 30 years growth, that 120 could come under pressure faster than what we hope. And the question we've been raising consistently probably is where to after that? Where's the appropriate place that you might respond to us around? Where's the expansion of our wastewater plant or treatment plan for? What is the planning for it? I mean, is it Climate Change Committee or Audit and Risk? Where do we talk about that?
Sorry, are you talking about the conversations we've had around the potential requirement for a new plant, or are you talking specifically fines?
Potentially requiring more capacity somewhere within the system to dispose of. If 120 becomes under pressure faster than we expect, particularly if we get a large trade waste customer or want to get trade waste established, what's the planning for that?
Yeah, so as part of one of our informal catch-ups, we've got in Tim's team, we've brought in some support to have a look at what the options are around a larger trade waste, and we've had some early engagement with Cord as well. So we're anticipating, obviously noting that Murray has been away sick, there may be a slight delay in bringing that report back, and it'll probably come back to potentially full council. Or we may do it in an open workshop to start with.
Kia ora.
The next 3 months type sort of thing?
I will find out where we might be at in terms of the information.
Kia ora, councillors. Are there any more comments or questions? Just on that, I guess there is a place for crystal ball gazing, and I guess as uncomfortable I was also with that assertion, I would assert that given this is the Finance Performance Committee, what we receive actuals and factuals and the deliberations of those happen at this point. There is a place for future proofing or future directions, and that I guess would sit outside of this committee, because this is the analysis of the current performance. Thank you very much, Jen, for this report. And as I was referring to, this certainly looks like the transition to a much easier to read for those. It was easier to read for me with the dashboard, and I appreciate looking through the on-track and near completion projects. It's something that as councillors we have asked for a long time, to see dashboard or this type of reporting to make it easier to get the information through. It also shows, I appreciate your comments around a qualitative assessments as well, just not just financial but qualitative, ensuring that we are delivering a good level of service and also monitoring that. So for me, there's a higher level of comfort reading these reports, because it shows a maturity in the direction that we're moving, and also the decisions that have been made to get here. I did have a couple of questions on page 37 under the issues, portfolio issues and risks. It just refers to, do you have enough resource and capacity to deal with some of these issues and identifying and mitigating, eliminating the risks, and what are the current processes, and is there implementation of a digital monitoring?
There's a number of ways. There are some risks that we sort of have to accept, but we probably need to put into our planning, because there are things that are external being imposed on us that we have limited control over, and there are things that are internal that we have control over. So it's around making sure that we're taking control of the things that we can control, and reducing or mitigating as much as we can of the impact of the risks of things that we can't control. So there's a mixture of that in terms of processes. There's an aspect of that in our planning and how we plan our individual projects, and how we factor some of these aspects into our timelines as well. So it needs to sort of happen at an individual project level, but also looking at it holistically as a program level as well. What are the things that we can work on?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate the response, and also the tracking of performance. I guess at some point, and whether it sits in this committee or not, is the alignment of some of those risks and mitigation to the Audit and Risk Committee, and potential overlap there, and whether it's a discussion for this committee or not. I'm sure that will shake itself out at some point. So I'm happy to move the report if there are no more further questions from councillors. Happy to move if I have a seconder. Seconded, Councillor Munt. Those in favour say aye. All in favour, none against. The report is so moved. Thank you very much, Jen. Councillors, that is the end of the Finance Performance Committee meeting. There is no public excluded part or minutes to move from the public court. However, there is a briefing directly after this meeting from Steve Gibling, if we can all remain where we are. Now the closing karakia. Unuhia, te pou, kia wātea, ai kua wātea. Kia ora, ngā mihi mana. Kia ora. Live streaming stopped, I think. Councillors, if we can...
Sorry, councillors, we just want to give you an update. We wanted to grab some time because we thought that the meeting wouldn't, finance and performance would be, give us a little bit of breathing space. A few weeks ago,